on a forgotten colony world called K7. A man named Ethan Cole lived alone in a small workshop at the edge of the desert. He was a human mechanic, known for fixing anything from hover bikes to plasma engines. But inside, he carried a loneliness deeper than the silence of the stars. He had no family, no friends, just machines and the whisper of wind through metal walls. Life had turned him cold until one evening, fate knocked on his door in the form of a drunk alien father and his silent daughter. The alien's name was Dren, a broken man with purple skin and shaking hands. His eyes red from drink, he begged Ethan for help. He said he owed credits to dangerous people, and they would kill him if he could not pay. He offered his daughter instead, a young girl named Lyra, deaf and mute, to work as Ethan's servant until the debt was cleared. Ethan's first reaction was anger. He shouted that he wasn't a slaver. But when he looked at the trembling girl hiding behind her father, his heart softened. She looked fragile, wearing torn clothes, her silver eyes bright with fear, but strangely calm. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed to take her in, telling Dren to never come back. The next morning, Lyra stood silently in the corner of the workshop, her hands folded, watching Ethan as he repaired a broken hover engine. She didn't speak, didn't make a sound, only nodded when he pointed or gestured. He left simple notes for her on a small datapad, writing things like bring tools or clean the workbench, and she obeyed quickly. She moved gracefully, almost too carefully, like she was afraid to break the air around her. At first, Ethan found her silence uncomfortable, but soon he realized something strange. She noticed things no one else did. Once, when a machine was about to short-circuit, she ran forward and pulled the cable seconds before it exploded. Another time, when the power went out, she touched the wall and pointed exactly where the fault was. Ethan tested her, pretending to fix a damaged engine, then watched as she calmly placed her hand on the metal and guided him to the exact broken piece. She couldn't hear him, yet she understood more than words could explain. It was as if she could feel the energy flowing through the workshop, like sound waves vibrating in her mind. That night, Ethan sat by the workbench, staring at her from a distance. She was sitting near the dim lamp, drawing symbols on a scrap of metal with her finger, glowing blue lines that faded after a second. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. But when she looked up, her eyes glowed faintly the same shade of blue. He asked her, "What are you doing?" Forgetting she couldn't hear, she smiled gently, erased the symbol, and went back to work. Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling both curiosity and unease. Something about this girl wasn't normal, and he knew it. Days passed, and the bond between them grew quietly. She never complained, never asked for food, never even showed tiredness. One morning, he found her standing outside, staring at the rising twin suns with a soft expression on her face. The wind moved through her white hair, and for a moment, Ethan felt like time itself had stopped. He realized he had started waiting for her every morning, just to see her face, but deep down, questions kept eating at him. Who was she really? And why did her presence make machines act strange? One evening, a merchant came to deliver supplies and noticed Lyra helping Ethan. He whispered nervously, "You took her in? You fool! Do you know what she is?" Ethan frowned, asking what he meant. The merchant lowered his voice. "People say her father wasn't just a drunk. He sold secrets, alien tech, forbidden things. That girl might not even be fully organic." Ethan laughed it off, but the words stuck like rust in his mind. That night, while Lyra slept in the corner, Ethan quietly scanned her with his old diagnostic visor. The device flickered, showing unstable readings, faint signals pulsing through her veins like data streams. He pulled the visor off, heart racing, whispering, What the hell are you? Lyra stirred and opened her eyes. Sensing his fear, she tilted her head, confused. Her silver eyes reflecting the blue lights of the workshop. Ethan felt guilty immediately. He waved his hand as if to say never mind, and she smiled softly. Then she reached out and touched his arm. A faint warmth spreading from her fingers, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt peace instead of emptiness. He didn't understand it, but he knew one thing. This girl was special, and she needed protection, whatever secrets she carried. They were not evil, just hidden, waiting for the right moment to be told. Outside, the desert wind howled against the metal walls. The stars above shimmered cold and distant, but inside that little workshop, a bond was forming stronger than blood or words. Ethan looked at her one last time, before turning off the light. He whispered quietly, "You're safe here." Lyra, she couldn't hear it, but somehow she smiled in her sleep, and far beyond the desert sky, in the dark void of space, something ancient stirred. Sensing the spark that had just been lit on planet K7 morning light, crept through the cracks in the metal walls. Filling Ethan's workshop with a golden haze, Lyra was already awake, cleaning tools and organizing parts in silence, her movements calm and graceful. Ethan watched her for a while, pretending to fix a motor coil. But really, he was studying the strange way she worked. She didn't need sound. She didn't even need sight sometimes. She just felt the machines, like they whispered to her through vibrations in the air. Every touch from her fingertips sent tiny blue sparks through the metal, a soft glow that vanished the moment he blinked. He knew it wasn't normal, but somehow he didn't feel afraid anymore. Since the night he had scanned her, Ethan had been torn between curiosity and guilt. He had seen readings on his visor that no human body should produce, flowing energy like a living circuit. Yet every time he looked at Lyra, she seemed so innocent, so unaware of the power she carried. He wondered if even she knew what she was. But whenever he tried to ask, she would simply smile, trace her fingers in the air, and draw glowing symbols that faded before he could understand them. It was as if she lived between two worlds, one silent, one unseen. The colony had grown restless. People whispering that the Krell Dominion was sending patrols closer to K7. Ethan ignored the rumors until one afternoon, a small ship flew low over the desert, leaving trails of plasma smoke behind. Lyra froze mid-step, her silver eyes wide, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan noticed. "It's just a patrol." "Don't worry," he said out loud, forgetting again that she couldn't hear. But she didn't relax. Instead, she walked slowly toward the door and pressed her hand against the metal frame. Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed, and suddenly the lights in the workshop flickered. Every device hummed as if reacting to her presence. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Ethan and shook her head. He didn't understand the gesture fully, but her expression said it all. Danger was coming. Later that night, as the two worked side by side, Ethan noticed her staring at the sky through the open hatch. The twin moons reflected in her eyes like silver coins. He walked closer and tapped her shoulder, holding up a data slate with the words, "Are you afraid?" She read it and smiled faintly, then picked up a small piece of scrap metal and began to carve into it. When she turned it toward him, it said one word written in strange symbols that translated roughly as always. Ethan nodded. He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt useless between them. Instead, he simply sat beside her in the silence. And for the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt shared. The next morning, something strange happened. Ethan woke up to the sound of his machines running on their own. Gears turning, screens blinking, energy flowing through cables. Lyra stood in the center of the workshop, surrounded by floating particles of light. Her eyes were closed, her hands moving slowly in the air. Shaping invisible waves, he froze, watching her. Every engine around her humming in perfect harmony, like an orchestra without sound. Then suddenly, the light flickered out, and she collapsed to the floor. Ethan rushed to her side, checking her pulse. She was breathing but weak, her skin pale with faint blue lines glowing beneath the surface. He carried her to the cot and covered her with a blanket. His mind racing, he didn't know whether to be afraid for her or of her. He sat beside her, watching as her breathing steadied. When she finally opened her eyes, he wrote quickly on the datapad, "What happened to you?" She stared at the words for a long moment, then slowly raised her trembling hand and drew a small circle in the air. Inside it, glowing letters appeared, signal. Then she touched his hand and added another. Pain. Ethan didn't understand. But he knew she was trying to warn him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by her side listening to the faint hum of the machines. He thought about the word signal, and it made him think of transmissions, of coded messages sent through energy. He had once worked in communications during the Terran Wars. He knew the sound of a pulse frequency when he heard it. If Lyra's body emitted signals, that meant someone might be listening. He stood up, walked to his bench, and connected his old frequency receiver. Static filled the room, but under the noise, he heard faint rhythmic beeps, a pattern. Repeating over and over, he scribbled it down, running it through his old decrypt program. Words began to form on the screen, broken and scrambled, but clear enough to read. Subject located. Transmit extraction order. Krell prototype confirmed. Ethan's heart stopped for a moment. He turned toward the sleeping girl, realization crashing into him like a wave. She wasn't just different. She was being tracked. Her body was sending signals to someone out there. He quickly shut off the receiver and dimmed the lights, panic rising inside him. But when he looked at her again, his fear turned to something else, protectiveness. She had no idea what she was, no idea she was being hunted. He couldn't let them take her, not after everything she had been through. He sat beside her again, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Don't worry, kid," he whispered, though she couldn't hear. "I'll keep you safe." And somewhere deep inside the sleeping girl, a spark of awareness stirred. Her heartbeat sensed with the soft hum of the machines. And through that silent pulse, a message drifted unseen through the void. A warning to those who were listening. The prototype had found a human. And this time, humanity would not give her up easily. Ethan woke before sunrise, his head pounding from a sleepless night. The words on the cracked datapad still burned in his mind. Subject located. Krell prototype confirmed. He sat by the window, watching the pale light crawl across the desert, his heart heavy with dread. The girl sleeping in his small workshop wasn't just a servant, wasn't even a normal alien. She was something built, something engineered. And now someone was coming for her. He turned to look at Lyra, lying quietly under the blanket, her breathing soft and calm. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, like any normal girl. But every few seconds, faint blue lines pulsed beneath her skin. He wondered if she could even feel them, if she knew the danger surrounding her. He wanted to shake her awake, to tell her they had to run. But something stopped him. She trusted him completely, and he couldn't bear to fill her world with fear. Ethan stood and powered on his old terminal. The screen flickered to life, showing the encrypted signal he had intercepted the night before. He started decoding the message again, but this time it was different. The frequency was stronger, the pulses sharper. Someone out there was getting closer, maybe already near the planet. He needed answers, and he knew Lyra was the only one who could give them. He walked over to her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She opened her eyes instantly, as if she had been waiting for him. Her silver pupils reflected the dim workshop lights, glowing faintly. Ethan held up the datapad with a simple question written on it. "Who are you?" For a long time, she didn't move. Only stared at the words, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she picked up a small metal rod and began to carve strange symbols into the floor. Blue light shimmered from the marks, forming shapes, circles, and lines that pulsed like veins. Ethan knelt beside her, watching as the pattern unfolded into something like a map, not of a planet, but of circuits. Finally, she pointed to the center and tapped it twice, then touched her chest. Ethan stared, realizing she was saying that she was the map, that she was the circuit. He wrote again. "Did they make you?" Lyra hesitated, then nodded slowly, a tear forming in her eye. She touched her neck, then drew a symbol in the air that looked like a cage. Ethan's throat tightened. She wasn't born deaf. She had been made this way, silenced on purpose. He wanted to ask why, but she shook her head violently, fear flashing in her eyes. Then she took his hand suddenly, pressing it to her heart. A pulse of warmth ran through him, and for a split second, images flooded his mind. Dark labs, alien scientists, glowing tubes, screens muffled by glass, and the crest of the Krell Dominion stamped on cold metal walls. Ethan gasped and pulled back, sweat running down his neck. She looked at him with guilt, mouthing a single word, "Sorry." Now he understood. She wasn't just a prototype. She was a living weapon. The Krell had turned her body into a receiver and amplifier, using her to channel energy, to spy, maybe even to destroy. But something had gone wrong. Maybe she had escaped. Maybe her father had taken her and run. Ethan clenched his fists, anger boiling inside. They had used her, broken her, and now they were coming to finish the job. Not while he was alive. He stood up and started locking down the workshop. He sealed the outer doors, packed emergency supplies, and pulled out his old Terran rifle from a hidden drawer. It was old, but reliable. The kind of weapon made before the galaxy became civilized. Lyra watched him silently, her eyes full of confusion. He scribbled fast on the pad. "They are coming for you. We have to leave." She looked down, then nodded, though fear made her hands shake. Outside, a storm was brewing, sand and dust rising like smoke across the horizon. Ethan powered up his hover hauler, its old engines coughing before roaring to life. He helped Lyra climb aboard, wrapping a scarf around her face to shield her from the wind. As they sped into the desert, lightning cracked across the purple sky. The storm swallowed them whole, and behind them, unseen through the dust, a dark ship descended slowly from orbit. Hours later, they stopped near a rocky canyon to take shelter. Lyra sat quietly by the fire, drawing symbols again in the sand. Ethan watched her, trying to understand, trying to connect the fragments of what he had seen in that vision. He realized something. The Krell weren't just experimenting. They were transmitting through her. Her silence wasn't just deafness. It was protection. If she heard sound, maybe she would become a weapon again. He whispered to himself. They built her to listen to power, not words. The thought chilled him to the bone. Suddenly, his communicator beeped. Static filled the air. Then a robotic voice spoke. "Unregistered Terran signal detected. Surrender immediately." Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He looked at Lyra, who was already standing, eyes glowing faint blue. The sand around her began to swirl, lifting slightly as energy gathered in the air. Ethan whispered, "No, don't," but it was too late. A burst of invisible force pulsed outward, knocking out his comms and scattering the signal. When it cleared, she collapsed again, trembling, her eyes dimming back to silver. Ethan caught her before she fell. Holding her close, he whispered, "You saved us. But you can't keep doing this. It's killing you." She looked at him weakly, shaking her head, then touched his face, tracing the word stay on his cheek with her finger. He nodded, eyes heavy with determination. No matter what she was. She wasn't just a weapon anymore. She was his. Someone he would protect with his life. Far above them, the Krell ship adjusted its course, tracking the last pulse of energy from the canyon. A metallic voice echoed inside the bridge. Target reacquired. Prepare the extraction unit. And as the desert storm raged, Ethan and Lyra sat together in silence. Unaware that the real hunt had already begun, the storm raged through the night. Covering the canyon in thick red dust, Ethan sat near the dying fire, his rifle resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the rocks. Lyra slept nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her breathing steady but faint. The blue lines beneath her skin dim like fading light. He had patched the hover hauler's engine. But they couldn't leave yet. The storm outside would tear them apart. He kept replaying the intercepted transmission in his mind, every word echoing like a warning. Target reacquired. When dawn came, the storm finally began to calm. The wind slowing to a mournful hum, Ethan climbed to the top of a ridge and scanned the horizon with his scope. In the far distance, faint dots moved across the desert. Metallic glints flashing under the rising suns. He cursed under his breath. They weren't traders, they were Krell hunters. 6 of them, moving in formation, they were coming fast. Using ground skimmers that cut through the sand like sharks through water, he slid down the ridge and ran back to Lyra. Shaking her gently awake, her eyes opened instantly. Silver and alert, he held up his datapad, words flashing across the screen. They found us. We need to move now, she nodded. Though her face paled with exhaustion, Ethan helped her to her feet and started packing quickly, tossing tools and energy cells into a bag. They mounted the hauler and sped out of the canyon, dust clouds trailing behind them. As they rode, the sound of engines grew louder, deep thunder rolling closer and closer. Ethan pushed the hauler to its limits, but the hunters were faster, their plasma bikes closing the gap. He glanced back and saw bright red lights cutting through the storm haze. Damn it, he muttered, gripping the controls tighter. Lyra turned, her face calm but determined. She pointed at the jagged cliffs ahead. Ethan understood instantly. They could lose them in the narrow passes. They swerved into the canyon's mouth, the hauler bouncing violently over rocks. Sparks flying from its underside, energy bolts blasted past them, one striking the wall beside Lyra, sending fragments of stone flying. She flinched, but didn't scream. She just held onto Ethan's arm tightly, when another blast nearly hit. Ethan yanked the hauler behind a boulder and stopped. He shut off the engine, signaling her to stay quiet. The whine of the Krell bikes echoed through the canyon, searching, circling like predators scenting prey. Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a small motion sensor. He placed it on the ground, the screen lighting up with red dots moving closer. He looked at Lyra, then pointed to a narrow cave at the side of the canyon. They crept inside, hearts pounding, the sound of footsteps and metallic voices filling the air outside. Through a crack in the rock, Ethan could see the hunters, tall figures in black armor, faces hidden behind glowing helmets. One of them knelt, scanning the sand, its voice cold and mechanical. Thermal signature confirmed. They're close. Ethan took a deep breath. Readying his rifle, Lyra touched his arm, shaking her head. She placed her hand on the rock wall and closed her eyes. A faint vibration ran through the cave, the air itself humming softly. The glow beneath her skin returned, brighter this time. Ethan watched in awe as the sand outside began to shift, forming mirage-like waves that distorted the hunters' sensors. They started shouting in confusion, their scanners going haywire. Moments later, The ground erupted with static, frying their equipment, forcing them to retreat temporarily. But Lyra collapsed again, her energy drained, her breathing weak. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground, whispering, "Hey, stay with me. You're okay." She opened her eyes halfway and traced a single word on his chest: "Run." He hesitated, torn between carrying her or fighting. But he knew she was right. He lifted her into his arms and ran deeper into the cave. Behind him, plasma bolts struck the entrance. Explosions shaking the ground, he stumbled through the darkness, following faint blue light pulsing from her hand. It led them toward a hidden tunnel that opened into an ancient chamber carved with strange alien symbols. Inside the chamber stood a massive crystal structure. Glowing softly, Ethan placed Lyra down beside it and looked around. Confused, she touched the crystal weakly, and it responded, glowing brighter. Images flickered across its surface, scenes of stars, machines, and data flowing like rivers of light. Ethan realized this was some kind of memory core. Maybe where she had been made, the crystal pulsed, sending out a low hum that vibrated through the air. Then a projection appeared, a holographic figure in Krell armor. Its voice echoed coldly, "Prototype L-47 detected." Unauthorized link established. Ethan aimed his rifle at the hologram, shouting, "Stay away from her," but it didn't respond. It only continued. Termination protocol initiated. The chamber began to shake. Lights flashing red. Ethan grabbed Lyra and pulled her away from the crystal. A sharp pain shot through his head as a wave of static filled the air. Lyra cried out silently, her hands glowing as she tried to block the signal. Blue lightning crackled around her, meeting the red energy from the crystal. The two forces collided, filling the room with a blinding flash. Ethan shielded his eyes, feeling the heat burn across his skin. When the light faded, the hologram was gone. The crystal cracked and smoking. Lyra lay unconscious in his arms, her pulse faint but steady. Ethan carried her out of the collapsing tunnel. Stumbling into the open desert once more, the sky above was dark. Ships moving through the clouds like shadows. The Krell were still coming. And now they knew exactly where she was. Ethan looked down at her. Brushing the dust from her face, he whispered softly, "No more running. If they want you, they'll have to go through me." As night fell, Ethan stood at the mouth of the canyon, rifle ready. Lyra slept behind him, her faint glow illuminating the sand above them. The first Krell dropships descended like falling stars. The hunt was over, but the real battle was just beginning. The desert night burned with falling fire, Krell dropships tearing through the sky like meteors. Ethan stood firm at the canyon's mouth, rifle gripped tight, wind whipping through his hair. Behind him, Lyra lay unconscious, her faint glow the only light left in the darkness. He could hear the hum of the approaching ships, engines vibrating the ground beneath his boots. He knew this was the end of the chase. No more running, no more hiding, only one last stand. He crouched beside her and whispered softly, "I promised I'd protect you, kid. And I will." He loaded the last of his rifle cells. The metallic click echoing in the silence. Above, the sky split open as the first dropship landed, sending waves of sand across the canyon. Krell hunters stepped out, black armor gleaming under the twin moons, plasma rifles in hand. A mechanical voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Human, surrender the prototype, and you may live." Ethan laughed bitterly, raising his weapon. "Come and take her then." The first shot came like thunder, plasma fire lighting up the night. Ethan rolled behind a rock, returning fire with precise bursts, every shot fueled by pure determination. He moved fast, using the terrain, his Terran training guiding every step. He hit one of the hunters square in the chest, sparks flying as it fell with a hiss. But there were too many, 10, maybe 12. Advancing in formation, energy blasts scorched the ground near him. Searing heat washing over his face, he was cornered, outnumbered, and outgunned, but he refused to retreat. Behind him, Lyra stirred, her body twitching as faint blue light spread beneath her skin. She opened her eyes slowly, confusion flickering before turning to fear. She saw Ethan fighting, saw the sky burning, and something deep within her awoke. Her memories came rushing back. The experiments, the pain, the endless silence. She had been made to obey, to destroy. But Ethan had given her something new, a choice. Tears filled her eyes as she reached out toward him. Energy flickering between her fingers, Ethan ducked behind another rock. Breathing hard, his rifle nearly empty, he glanced back and froze. The air around Lyra shimmered like liquid light. Blue lightning arced from her hands to the ground. Spreading across the canyon floor like roots, her eyes glowed brighter than the moon's. Her hair flowing in an unseen wind, the Krell hunters hesitated, their scanners going wild. Warning, unstable energy surge, one of them reported. But it was already too late. Lyra stood, her feet leaving the ground as energy lifted her body. The silence around her broke with a soundless pulse, a wave of power rolling through the air. Ethan shielded his face as every Krell weapon overloaded and exploded in their hands. The hunters screamed, their armor cracking under the invisible force. Lyra raised her arms higher, her voice trembling as she spoke for the first time. No more. Her words echoed in Ethan's mind. Not through sound, but through connection, pure and clear. A massive pulse erupted from her chest. Spreading out in a blinding ring of light, the sky turned white, and for miles, every Krell ship in orbit began to spark and fail. Engines died, systems shut down. One by one they fell from the sky like broken stars. Ethan watched in awe, unable to move, unable to speak. The storm of energy surrounded her. Wrapping her in a cocoon of silver light, he shouted her name, Lyra. But his voice vanished in the roar of the wind. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light faded. The desert fell silent again. Ethan blinked through the haze. His ears ringing, he saw her lying in the sand. The glow gone, her body still. He dropped his rifle and ran to her side, his hands shaking as he lifted her gently. "Come on, kid, stay with me," he whispered. His voice breaking, her eyes fluttered open, faint but warm, and she smiled weakly, her voice soft and trembling. Whispered the word he never expected to hear. Home. Ethan froze, tears stinging his eyes. He held her close. Her pulse was fading, but her expression was peaceful. He realized she wasn't dying. She was changing. Her body shimmered with light again, but this time it was calm, controlled. She touched his face and whispered inside his mind, "You showed me who I am. Not a weapon, not a machine, just..." Ethan nodded, his heart aching. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. The dawn broke slowly over the horizon, the desert glowing gold under the first rays of sunlight. The wreckage of Krell ships lay scattered across the dunes, smoking ruins stretching for miles. Lyra sat beside Ethan, weak but alive, the wind brushing through her hair. She could hear now, truly hear, the rustle of sand, the soft hum of the wind, and Ethan's heartbeat beside her. For the first time, the silence was gone, replaced by life. Ethan looked at the sky where the last Krell ship burned in the atmosphere. He smiled faintly. "Guess we showed them what a little humanity can do." Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Humanity?" "Kind," he chuckled softly. Sometimes they sat together, two survivors bound by fate, silence, and something far deeper, understanding far above the desert. The message of her awakening traveled through space. carried by the same signal once used to control her. Now it carried a warning instead. The prototype chose humanity, it said, and humanity chose her back. And somewhere beyond the stars, those who had created her trembled, for they finally understood the truth that Ethan Cole had already learned. Even in the vast, cold galaxy, compassion was the one power no empire could ever control.